What's up, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Fantasy Holics podcast. I am Jordan Jaika here with my co-host Jerry Wilkie, and we are absolutely stoked to be here with you today. So you may be wondering out there, what are the Fantasy Holics? Well, to describe it simply, it's a lifestyle, we're a family, and most importantly, we're a community of people where we discuss everything fantasy and fantasy sports related. So let me be the first to welcome you in joining our family and officially becoming a Holic. With that being said, I'm going to jump right into it, give you a quick lowdown of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to kick it off. Jerry and I are going to talk a little bit about the league that him and I are co-commissioning. Then we'll jump into a little bit of daily fantasy, jump into our weekly rankings, do a little bit of the game preview for week 5, and wrap it up from there. So to kick it off, Jerry, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about our league since you are in first right now, which I think is why you wanted to put it on the schedule, but I'll let you start off with that.
Well, yeah, we decided to run a XFL fantasy league this year. At the time that we were looking at it, there wasn't any platforms really offering it, and then I think one of the something ended up offering it, but we decided we were already so far into it, doing it on Google spreadsheets that we did it ourselves. The way we set it up was it's 8 teams. Everybody gets a team quarterback, and then basically 5 flex spots. So you could play all running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, whatever you wanted. No kickers, no defense, and yeah, I mean it's been fun so far. I started out the season 3-0. Just lost my first game last week by I think what was it 8 points or so.
Yeah, finally, your season's over now.
Yeah, and I got to fold it up now. I don't know if gonna be able to make the playoffs now. Um, but yeah, it was fun. Me and Jordan were the last 2 teams to pick quarterbacks. I ended up with Houston, which ended up being a steal because PJ Walker's pretty much carrying my team along with Cam Phillips, and I also tripled up with them and grabbed Cleo Lewis. So
Yeah, you
they have
have
a
the
have a bad
triple
week.
threat right there.
Yeah.
And then you left me with the crappy Seattle QBs last.
Well, you should have chose QBs earlier.
I don't think anybody thought Well, if I don't think most people remember, but PJ Walker was fighting for his job preseason. I believe he was fighting with Connor Cook, who I think is just, if anything, it's name recognition for a lot of people. But PJ Walker has been something else. Um,
He's been insane. 12 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions. Um, he's been he's been really good. I mean, he's part of the revenue. There's a lot of zeros that we get in this league because there's last minute guys inactives. We got there for the first like week or two. There really wasn't any like notes on who was injured, who's out of the
yeah.
lineup. So they've finally started to. There's more people on Twitter starting to follow it more. The actual website's getting updated more, so it's becoming becoming more reliable now. But and we're getting less and less zeros. But it's football in February and March, so I mean, how can you not like that?
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And the one thing I've noticed kind of is there's really not any running backs that have consistently been good. You can say Matt Jones. I think he had the one week that was kind of a dud, but really a lot of the top teams in our league, none of them are running back heavy. I know there's been a few weeks I haven't even played a running back because we're playing 5 flexes, and yeah, running backs have really been devalued in this league.
Yeah, I think I grabbed one with my first pick, but and he's been in my starting lineup for the 4 weeks, but it's mostly been wide receivers and a couple tight ends here and there. Um, I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to last at least a good couple years. I think Vince McMahon knows what he's doing, and it's pretty fun.
Yeah, I think attendance wise, it's going to be interesting to kind of track over the next few weeks. I know March Madness is starting, so I'm really interested to see how the TV ratings are during March. In a few weeks, I know there's a game on FS1 and FS2 in the same weekend, so that'll be a big test. But I was actually reading earlier today that the attendance for this point in the season for week 4 versus the AAF week 4 was almost triple. So that's an encouraging sign. I think Vince McMahon has the capital to put into it. Not only that, I mean, he's got strategic partnerships with ESPN, ABC, Fox. So looks like, which I'm excited about, just means more fantasy to play year round.
Yeah, and speaking of the schedule, ESPN is I don't know how many games they've carried so far yet, but they're carrying a 9 p.m. game this week, so that's going to be interesting to see. That's the latest game that they've had so far, that they're going to have so far. So it'll be fun to see that this weekend.
Yeah, I think everything right now is just it's a big learning curve for him, and I'm happy to be a part of the ride.
Yeah, exactly, and turn this into a keeper league if I end up winning.
Yeah, of course, only if you win though. That's the only way we're gonna make it a keeper league. All right, so let's transition a little bit into daily fantasy, which is a little newer for you and I because we are in New York, and the great state of New York did not allow us to play daily until, oh, what was it, 2 weeks ago now. So a little newer for us, but from what I've seen early on, even a lot of the top scoring teams are not very high scoring. And I think that's an overall trend that I've seen in fantasy, just with the XFL fantasy, I guess I should say, is a lot of inconsistency week to week. Really hard to predict who's going to perform well and who's going to have a dud.
Yeah, it's. I did my first lineup last week, and I thought I put together a pretty decent lineup. Just did a small little double up. I ended up winning, but it was it's so weird just to see like these low scoring games. And after the Saturday games, the money line, the cutoff line was 7 points, to between winning your $2 or not. So it's crazy like how the scoring is in DFS. But I mean, it's again like you said, it's fantasy in February, it's fantasy in March, and it's nice that we have it here at least for FanDuel, and hoping that DraftKings picks it up too.
Yeah, hopefully they'll catch on eventually. But I don't know how you put your lineups together, but the strategy that I've been implementing is I like to, since the scoring's so inconsistent, I've been trying to raise the floor of my lineups as much as possible. So it kind of starts twofold. The first is I like to take a quarterback that's consistent. I think there's only a few quarterbacks that you can trust in the league right now, and I really don't want to take a chance that my quarterback's going to get pulled at halftime. I don't want to play Matt McGloin and him get me 2 points. I don't want to play Brandon Silvers and him get me 4 points. I'd rather pay a little more, guarantee me 18, 19, 20 plus points from PJ Walker, Jordan Ta'amu, Josh Johnson. Those are really the three that I trust right now. And the same goes for running back. There's very few that have been consistent early on this season. And really, I don't want to spend money on a running back that may or may not get even a touch. I mean, there's running backs that will go from 10 touches one week to one or two the next week. And then all of a sudden, it seems like they're out of the league. It's happened very quickly. So I've kind of been trying to raise my floor as much as possible, take a high quality quarterback that I can trust, take a high end running back that I can trust. And then I usually stack a wide receiver with my high end quarterback. I did that with Trey McBride last week, which really helped me out with Josh Johnson. And then really taking some darts at some lower end wide receivers with some upside. Maybe guys that have easy matchups, guys that are getting targeted more. I think that's going to be interesting to track this week. BJ Daniels is going to be starting for the first time, more than likely. Luis Perez. They had some guys that they targeted more than Matt McGloin and Brandon Silvers before them. So I'm really looking forward to see how the target numbers change, and it'll be a fun week.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you on the quarterbacks, more so the running backs, because unlike our league, you have to play at least one running back in DraftKings and FanDuel. So if you're going to spend any money, I'd say definitely spend it there, because you don't want to end up with a running back that's only getting 4 carries. Or last week in my case, I got a running back that had 1 carry. Um, so I put together a couple of dummy lineups, and I got two of the top four running backs that are in the league, in each of, or one in each of them. Matt Jones I got in a lineup, and Davion Smith I got in a lineup. And actually, the second lineup, the one that I have Davion Smith, and we'll get into our rankings later, is a lineup that I put together with the top my top player from each of the main four positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. Um, so and it worked out. I mean, I got a couple guys, the bottom end guys. I'm spending about 3,000 a guy, which isn't a lot. It's almost the bare minimum. But they're guys that have had some action in a couple weeks in the this season. So I could see them, like, I mean, they're really boom or bust guys, but those top four guys could be the ones that are gonna carry your team. In the in the lineup that I put Matt Jones in, I basically chose all the teams that are playing against like the bottom ranked defenses,
Hmm.
so eighth and seventh place defenses, and ended up with a couple of the same guys. I ended up with the same tight end, Parham, and
Hmm.
David Smith was in that lineup too. But Luis Perez is the quarterback I got there, so I didn't take the high end quarterback there. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely something I'm going to continue to do. FanDuel, as long as they allow it here in New York, I'm gonna stay with it. A couple. Let's see. I got my couple value plays. I don't know if you mentioned any of your value plays yet. Um, Philip Nelson at quarterback on DraftKings is about 7,500 for Dallas, and then on FanDuel he's $16. The way they do it, FanDuel is a $200 budget.
Hmm.
DraftKings is a $50,000 budget. So it's basically the same numbers, just different denominations. My running back, I got Christine Michael. He's another one of those top four running backs in the league that you want on your lineup. You want to pay up for him, but he's not too pricey. He's only 5,200 on DraftKings, $14. He's from St. Louis. And then I put two wide receiver tight ends there, but they're both wide receivers in this case. Jalen Tolliver, 5,700 on DraftKings, $16 on FanDuel, plays for Tampa Bay. And then their opponent in Los Angeles, I got Jordan Smallwood, 6,200 on DraftKings, $16 on FanDuel.
Yeah, a few lower end guys that I had mentioned too. So Jazz Ferguson, who I believe you actually played in your lineup last week. Philip Nelson actually targeted him a little more than Landry Jones did previously. He's very cheap in both formats, so he's kind of a dart throw that I have. You also mentioned Luis Perez this week at quarterback. Pretty easy matchup. Um, and actually, Kobe Pearson led the team in targets last week, which I thought was interesting. A lot of the attention was on McKay for most of the season. I know he was one of my, I can't remember if I took him first or second, but he was my back-to-back pick, him and Sammy Coates, which has not worked out for me. But I really like them this week, especially, like I said, I'm interested to see a little bit of the chemistry. If Pearson shows a little bit of chemistry with Perez this week, I think he might be a fairly consistent play season long, and I like him at a cheap price this week on FanDuel. Running back wise, I have Darius Victor, who had a pretty solid week last week, had 18 carries, I believe, for 82 yards. Doesn't provide a ton in the passing game, but I think New York with Luis Perez is really going to focus more on a ground and pound kind of game, let Luis Perez manage. I also like Jarrell Presley if he does come back for DC. He was out touching Pumphrey before his injury, so whenever Presley comes back, I think with Cardell Jones struggling, I think they're going to look to run the ball a little more, and DC overall has been a disaster. So I think they're going to try a little more of a conservative approach. Pep Hamilton, I know previously kind of likes to pound the ball with other organizations he's been with. So I have my eye on him as a value play at running back as well.
Yeah, all good picks. Couple that you didn't mention that I see on the notes here. Your boy Flynn Nagel
Yep.
and Keenan Reynolds. I've kind of had a little bit of a crush on him, and Austin Parole too. He's former Bill. Well, we drafted him and ended up last year drafted him, and he didn't make the practice squad. So
I think that's half the XFL is half Bills, right? We were talking about that the one day.
Cardell Jones, Tyree Jackson. Yeah, there's a lot of former Bills in the
Cam
league.
Phillips was there a little while, right?
Yep, yep. He's number one receiver right now.
But yeah, kind of bouncing off of Keenan Reynolds and Austin Prohl too. I didn't talk about BJ Daniels, but I really like him if you're looking to buy low on a quarterback. The reason being just with his rushing numbers, he offers a pretty good floor. He had, I believe it was 84 rushing yards in the half that he played last week. And, if he can have any, even 50, 60, 70 yards is a pretty good floor for a quarterback in this league. So he's another guy that I would target and maybe stack him with Keenan Reynolds.
Definitely a lot of good plays there. And like I said, with the more stats being kept with the XFL, more information being available, you can build better lineups. You kind of know you don't have to watch every game to know like how teams are. You can kind of just look at the numbers and see that okay, Houston's putting up a lot of points, but they're also letting in a lot of points. So
Right.
maybe stack people against them.
Yeah, and I remember week one in our league was extremely interesting. I feel like almost every lineup had somebody that wasn't even on the roster because they didn't post who was inactive anywhere. So I remember some people were upset, and we all had access to the same information, which was a lack of.
It's definitely low scoring. I mean, if you remember, I got it here. We had Dustin put up 22 points and he won.
Yeah. That was against, Law, the team, I believe, who is still playing three guys that are inactive every week.
Yeah,
So
he's
if you're
got.
listening right now, put a lineup in.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so kind of transitioning from daily into our season-long rankings, why don't we start with talking about our quarterback rankings this week? I think for the most part, pretty straightforward. I think any rankings that you see are going to have PJ Walker number one. We differentiate. You have Jordan Ta'amu second. I have Josh Johnson second, flip-flopped. Um, Anybody on this list in particular that really stands out to you?
Not really. I mean, our top four are pretty much the same, with the exception of Johnson and Tiamo flip flop for each of us, and then obviously the next four are going to be the same because there's only 8 teams. I got Cardell Jones. Like, I mean, I've seen places where Cardell was down to 8. I got him up to 5. I mean, he's still he still could sling the ball. He's been having a really
Wow.
bad last couple of weeks, but his wide receivers are. I mean, that's part of the reason why he's up so high for me is because he does have the talent around him. Um, we're not too far off. I mean, you're where I have Cardell, you have Perez. You're a little higher. You're a couple
Mm.
spots higher than I am. But other than that, I mean, we're pretty close everywhere else. It's we're
And especially when you're only ranking eight quarterbacks, there's really not a ton of room for error. Like I said, I mean, if you don't have one of the top few guys, I mean, you're just praying at that point that you're going to get a good performance out of one of your QBs.
yeah, yeah, and a lot of them offer that rushing upside. I think
Um,
Josh Johnson had a touchdown or he had a 3 point conversion
yeah.
rushing last week.
Yep. Okay. So let's move over to wide receivers then. I have Nelson Spruce number one on mine. Obviously, you're going to have to keep an eye out on that. He is injured. For me personally, just because I think the matchup is pretty juicy, I would put Trey McBride number one if Spruce is out. Uh, I have Cam Phillips second. You have him first. You have Spruce second. Cam Phillips, the dud worries me slightly, and I think Houston has a ton of weapons, which always frightens me, and I'm just wondering if these duds are going to become more frequent. I was reading that they played a ton of press coverage on Cam Phillips last weekend, and he really struggled to get open. And if teams start to catch on how to cover him, I'm interested to see if he picks up and does a little better this week.
I think he was also banged up a little bit. I know he was on a couple of the earlier in the week injury reports, and I was kind of worried if he was going to play or not. On I think the game was on Sunday, but I don't think he's going to. I mean, the way that he's played, with the exception of last week, the way he's been playing the 3 weeks before that, there's no way that they can just kind of phase him out. I think he'll bounce back. I mean, I don't know how many more 3 touchdown games we're going to see from him, but he's he didn't even have the targets last week, so I think something was just up with him and his body. The defense did a good job of keeping him out of it, and Khalil Lewis was open all game, and then he got a lot of the targets. But I think Cam Phillips is going to bounce back and kind of get back into that number one spot.
Yeah, and Khalil Lewis has really quietly been very effective this season. I didn't really realize until I was really diving into the stats, but he actually leads the XFL in targets right now, which is interesting. He's not a trendy name, but he leads the XFL in targets right now. Um, and I thought that was interesting. Dan Williams has consistently got a ton of targets. I have him third. You also have him third.
That's the
Um,
Dan Williams. We got two of them in our league, right?
Yeah, the Dan Williams controversy of 2020. One person selected Dan Williams, the other person selected Daniel Williams. A lot of us not knowing too much about the league didn't really catch it. We thought they were just two different people. And he had a big week one, which I can assure you, if he had a giant dud week one, it would have been no big deal. The person that took him second would have dropped him. But since he's been pretty solid, both the guys really wanted to keep him. So we have two Dan Williams. Well, Dan and Danielle Williams, I should say.
What a mess that was.
And another guy, really the only guy we differentiate on quite a bit are really the DC wide receivers. I think you're a little higher on them than me. After watching the disaster that was last week, I lost a lot of faith in the DC offense. I have Rodgers down at about 12. You have him a little higher. It looks like at 8. And then I have Rashad Ross at 14. You have him at 13. You also have DeAndre Tompkins ranked, who I don't have ranked in my top 15. Want to talk a little bit about why you're higher on the DC wide receivers?
Like I said, Cardell has all the tools to be at least a pretty good quarterback in this league, not really the NFL. And he's been spreading the ball since, well, with the exception of the last week or two, he's spread the ball quite a bit the first couple of weeks of the season. And I think they're going to get back on track. And it's really hard to predict like who's going to be the guy week in and week out. Same thing with Houston. I mean, Cam Phillips was the guy for the first 2 weeks, and all of a sudden he has a one-catch, 9-yard game last week, and everybody in DFS that paid up for him kind of cursing him out. But I think Houston gets back on, or not Houston. I think DC gets back on track. I think Cardell Jones, and they also have Tyree Jackson. So whoever's under center, I think they're gonna. I think he's going to be able to get his receivers the ball. Tompkins, I've liked him for the last couple of weeks, even though he hasn't really done much. Eli Rogers is getting a lot of targets. I don't. Let me bring it up here real quick. The computer's being a little bit slow, so even if he's not putting up the numbers,
it looks like he's tied for third in targets.
6, 8, 6, and 9 for targets, and so 9 his highest targeted game was last week. So. I got him a little higher. I think that they're going to keep on looking his way, and just the talent that they have on offense is enough to make me put him where I got him.
Yeah, I definitely think the offense has the ability to turn it around. As a team, I think the bigger concern is their lack of pass rush, and their defense looks absolutely atrocious. It's funny, though. I remember after week one talking to a few people, and I said, there's no way that DC and Houston aren't going to play in the championship. And that changed. My tune changed fairly quickly. All right, let's transition into the running backs then. Running backs, we are pretty similar on. We both have Dev Smith and first, Cameron Artis-Payne second. I have Matt Jones third. You have Patrick third. Matt Jones fourth. I have Patrick fourth, so we just have Matt Jones and Patrick flip-flop. Lance Dunbar, I have fifth. I love Lance Dunbar. I remember us messaging during the draft, and I was trying really hard to get Lance Dunbar. I think the reason that I liked him so much preseason was I thought he's been decently involved in the pass game, but surprisingly enough, I believe Cameron Artis-Payne had 5 receptions last week, and he's been a lot more involved in the passing game than really I anticipated. I don't really remember him being a pass-catching threat, but he's been very involved in the passing game. Any running backs on the deeper side of things that you're looking at to maybe have a big week?
The one running back that I got in one of my lineups, Christine Michael. He's been getting some consistent targets. Now the way that I've been keeping track of it for targets at least is it's more touches. I got a label target, so like any pass catching or rushing that he gets, and he hasn't really been ascending. Looking at it here, he only had 8 in week 1, and then his best was week 2, 17, and he kind of went down since then, but he's still getting the ball in his hands. 13 in week 3, and then 12 in week 4. I just like the opportunity there. We, like you said, the first like 6 or so, we're very similar there, with a couple flip flops here. Lance Dunbar, he's been awesome out of the backfield. He's been catching a lot of balls. Other than that, I mean.
Yeah, the big trend that I've noticed with running backs, especially in the XFL more so than the NFL, there is a ton of committees, and we're not just looking at 1 or 2 guys in a lot of committees. there's some teams that are using three guys pretty consistently. All of them maybe getting eight or so touches and not really a ton of upside when you're getting eight touches. I'm curious to see if Martez Carter returns this week. He had that huge week and then got injured. The huge week where he had three touchdowns and did a few cool backflips. He got the nickname, or maybe he had it already, Mr. Excitement. So I'm looking forward to seeing if he comes back and seeing how they utilize him because they really seem to want to feed him the ball in that game. And I'm interested to see if his usage is as high as it was that week when he comes back.
Yeah, he's another one. I was actually going to mention him. He's another one that I want to see if he comes back, and I don't think he's going to have another three touchdown game, but he's going to definitely put some excitement. He earned that name, Mr. Excitement. He's going to put some excitement on the TV for us.
And that's part of, we haven't really mentioned it yet, but that's part of the XFL that I love, or the interviews on the sidelines and how interactive it is really with the viewing audience. Just watching him after scoring those touchdowns, he was very excited, and the interviews were really entertaining after.
It's funny watching the guys like that, or after they go to interview him after like a bad play and how pissed
Yeah.
off.
I remember week one, they caught some flack. I can't remember who the kicker was, but they interviewed a kicker right after missing a field goal, and he was not too thrilled.
I remember just this past week, I forgot who it was interviewing, but she tried to go up to the coach, and he just kept on walking away from her. And then eventually, like he turned around and said something, and she just kind of gave up.
I don't envy those reporters at all.
They got a tough job.
That's where you send the intern. Like, you want to make it in this industry, go catch that coach that just lost the game 5 seconds ago. All right, moving on to the least exciting part, and I don't think there's a ton to discuss here with the tight ends.
Just the top.
I'm not really touching anybody except Parham on the top. Brandon Barnes has shown some ability. I was reading an article this morning, actually, how Barnes has run the most routes from the tight end position. Because even though Parham is eligible to be a tight end, he's mostly lining up in the slot, and he's really playing receiver at this point. But besides those two on top, I mean, I wouldn't be touching anybody else.
Bruzel's the only other one. He missed last week, but he's definitely got a lot of potential there to get some targets. And the guy that I've been consistently putting in my top four, top five, Kari Lee, for the same reason as my wide receivers. I mean, he's another one on that DC Defenders team that just if they spread the ball out, he can definitely make something happen. But last couple of weeks, he hasn't really done too much of anything.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the targets right now. Parham has 34, and none of the other tight ends are above 15. It looks like Barnes is second with 13, so it's not too close.
Boom or bust. I mean, you kind of got to just get him in the red zone and hopefully get a touchdown or even one of those fancy 3-point conversions.
Yeah, and luckily, I don't think many leagues, and especially for daily, they don't make you play a tight end, so not really too much of a concern.
Yeah, they're all flex spots there. You're allowed to play two wide receivers and then two flexes for the most part.
Yep. And then finishing it off, we have the defenses. Once again, I don't know if you have any notes of interest on this. Our league doesn't even play defense for season long. I'm not sure if that's common, but any notes on the defenses for this week?
Well, like you mentioned a little earlier about how we're seeing a lot of lower scoring games, the points per games against, like last place for PPG against is 22 points against, which I mean that's three touchdowns.
Right.
So you're not getting a lot of high scoring. One thing that you mentioned while we were kind of off camera before we got started is the crazy number of scoring, like these crazy scores that you get because
Yeah.
of the one and the two and the 3-point conversions. But it's yeah, I mean you're as the teams or as the weeks go on, the teams are just going to get better. We're getting a little better feel of what DFS plays you want to play against what defenses and what offensive players you want to play. And it's like Houston's looking like they're letting in a lot of points against, but they're also scoring a lot of points. So those are games that you're probably going to want to stack. LA has just by reference, they lead the league in turnover differential. They got +5, and the worst team is going to be Tampa Bay at -4, where they're also Tampa Bay gives up the least amount of yardage by far, but they're also turning the ball over a lot. giving them a -4 turnover differential. So it's I mean, like I said, as the season goes on, we only have 6 weeks left, but as the season goes on, we're going to get a little bit more information and hopefully kind of carry over into next year and maybe have a better product out there.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned were those conversions, and I found it interesting just based on viewing, and I haven't looked at the statistics, and I'd be interested in doing so, but it seems to me that a lot of those conversions aren't being converted. I don't know what the percentages are right now. I know it's not a ton of 3-point conversions have been attempted, but I'd be interested to know what the percentages are, and there's got to be somebody out there working on some sabermetrics for XFL conversions.
I'm sure we could find it. I didn't even think about it when I was putting the defense together. Definitely something that, with it being something unique to the league,
Yeah.
um, we'll have it for next week's podcast.
And then one of the other things I'll kind of go back and talk about running backs a little bit. I'm really interested to see if running back usage increases over the next few weeks. I was looking at total running back touches, and from week 1 to where we were in week 4, it's increased by about 25%. And it seems like a lot of teams are committing a little more to the run. It seems like offensive linemen are a little more in sync. There wasn't a ton of practice time before they started playing games, so I don't know if a lot of teams were out of rhythm. But to me, it seems like a lot of teams are committing more to the run, and I'm kind of interested to see if running backs become a more viable play in a flex position. Because right now, I'd rather take the upside of a receiver in any flex position, but I'm interested to see if anybody starts getting more consistent usage.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers show that it's been up 25%, but also again, it's another thing that just is going to come with time. The linemen are getting more used to each other. We're getting a little bit of bad quarterback play, so teams are going to want to switch over to giving the running back the ball and trying to make something happen there. Because I mean, we've seen Matt McGloin get benched and injured. We've seen I forgot what his name was, but the dude for Seattle just kind of leave the team.
Oh, Quentin Flowers.
Yeah, and it's so like you're earlier we mentioned about the what quarterbacks that we want in DFS. I mean, there's only like two or three that we want, and then the other ones are kind of just hit or miss. So
Right.
you think that those teams are going to be the ones that are going to try to run the ball a little bit more and just put some points up on the board.
Yeah, interesting stat that I actually found too. Over the first 4 weeks of or I should say the first 3 weeks of the season, only 5 individuals rushed for over 75 yards in a game. And then in week 4 alone, there was 4 guys that rushed for over 75 yards. So almost matching the entire season total. So just the trend to kind of keep an eye on. Few of those were quarterbacks. Tom, he's actually, I believe, fourth in the league in rushing right now. BJ Daniels might quickly move up the standings. He's got to already be pretty high up there with his 84-yard rushing week. But just another thing to keep an eye on there.
Yeah, and now's the time where in DFS you wanna, and we already talked about it, but you want to play um, the higher end running backs or just running backs in general, so you can get try to get them before they start catching on and start playing more running back usage.
Right. So, kind of transitioning into our next topic, we're going to talk a little bit about week 5, give you a little preview of the games, give you some score predictions, and kind of roll through it. So, game number 1 on Saturday is the Seattle Dragons at the Houston Roughnecks, 2 p.m. on ABC. We have the over under at 46 right now. And Houston is favored by 13 points right now, which seems pretty significant to me. I don't know what your thoughts are on that spread there.
It's a little in like week 1. I noticed they put the spreads on the score or on the
Mm,
score ticker when you were watching. I think it's a little too high. I know Seattle isn't. Houston's one of the better offensive teams, but I know Seattle isn't too bad. They're I think like anything more than 10 is kind of crazy. Just because we it's so inconsistent.
yeah.
But yeah, this is one that I would probably I might take the over, but I'd probably take Seattle with the points here.
Yeah, definitely. And, a few interesting notes. Houston forced 5 turnovers the last week. They still only won by 7. The last three games, they only won by a possession. So even though they're undefeated right now, they've kind of been winning by the skin of their teeth. And you got to think at some point that's going to give. BJ Daniels starting for Seattle this week. I've mentioned him a few times, but he seemed to ignite the offense a little bit. Brandon Silvers was kind of the first few weeks of the season. So it feels kind of like a trap game to me. But we'll see. Like I think 13 is pretty significant. I have Houston winning 29, Seattle 22, and just because I feel like it's a trap game. I wouldn't be surprised if Seattle really came out and the offense played well. Their defense stepped their game up and showed up a little bit in Houston.
Yeah, and I have the same score spread, just a couple points less. I got 27-20. Covers the over/under at 47 points. And you make a really good point with BJ Daniels starting. Going back to these teams not having really like a preseason or like a mini camp or anything like that. So we don't know what we're going to get out of BJ Daniels. He could come out and light the league on fire just like PJ Walker's been doing.
Right.
So it definitely feels like a trap game as well to me, and it's going to be Houston's kind of turning into my team. I don't really have we don't have a local team, but because of the fantasy relevant players that I got on my team, I'm kind of liking Houston. I've been looking forward to watching their games, but it's gonna be fun. I get to watch this one. I don't have to work yet, and hopefully I'll wake up from my nap there.
We'll see how much of a fan you become if Cam Phillips has a few more duds.
Yeah, PJ Walker gets hurt.
Second game on Saturday is the New York Guardians, and they are in Dallas facing the Renegades. That's a 5 p.m. game. It's on Fox. The over-under is currently set at 36.5. Dallas is favored by 7.5. What notes do you have on this game?
Um, this one I can definitely I like the 7.5 there. Dallas has looked pretty good. Their defense hasn't been too great, but their offense has been getting better. Um, Louis Perez, he's solid. He needs to manage the offense. He's got a lot of weapons there. He's got the best tight end in the league there. Just keep on feeding him the ball.
Mhm.
I have a score of 24-18, which covers the over and covers the spread. No, it doesn't spread. My math was off there. Don't cover
Yeah,
the spread.
close enough.
Don't cover the spread, but I do cover the over with Dallas. I think that it's not really handedly, but I think that they win. I think that they win handedly. 24-18, I got.
So I'm actually on the other side right now. The New York defense has actually been really effective, and I think that's really being overshadowed by the troubles that their offense has been having. I think a lot of people remember Matt McGloin's kind of temper tantrum on national television, blaming the coaching staff and really everybody except himself, even though I saw him miss several open throws that half. Really wanted to blame everyone else. But really, their defense has played really well, and that's kind of the only reason they've been in any games. And I think that's going to bring a whole new approach with Louis Perez. I don't think he's going to force it. He was really solid, actually, when he was playing in the AAF last season as well. I think they're going to run the ball a ton, feed Darius Victor. If Tim Cook comes back, give him a few touches. But I think they're really going to focus on managing the game and playing good defense, kind of that ground and pound style. So I have them winning by 10, holding Dallas to 10 points, them scoring 20. Makes me a little nervous. New York hasn't won on the road yet this season, but there's a first time for everything.
Yeah, and you get that little kind of that AFC East rivalry too, or NFC East rivalry too. You got New York going to Dallas.
The baby Giants and the baby Cowboys.
Yep.
Then kicking off on Sunday, we have St. Louis, who is playing at DC at 3 p.m. on FS1. Right now, the over-under is 39.5, and the spread is St. Louis by 3.5, which that was a spread that I was really surprised about, and we've talked about it a little bit. You're really high on DC and think they can turn it around, but St. Louis has been really, really good, so I was really surprised the spread wasn't more. Honestly, I know you'll disagree a little bit with it, but St. Louis has been playing really well, and after a disastrous week, I really thought the spread would be more.
I think a lot of it goes into being on the road. They're and again, we seen what DC's offense can do at the beginning of the season, so it's just a matter of kind of just getting back into rhythm. But yeah, St. Louis going on the road. I'm not surprised that they're the favorite because of the way that DC's been playing the past 2 weeks. But I am. I think this is actually, if I'm not mistaken, this is DC's third. They started the season at home the first two games, and they went on the road for the next two games and ended up losing those two
Yep.
games. So they're back to being at home. So I mean, they are undefeated at home so far. Maybe they keep the trend going. But 3.5, I can see where you're coming from, but again, like I said, it's St. Louis coming in on the road and being the favorite is it's definitely a good number for them.
Yeah, so one of the things, and we talked about this earlier too, St. Louis has actually given up the least amount of touchdowns this season with 7. It's one of those things with a struggling offense, a defense that's playing really well. I don't see DC scoring a ton. I think their defense is really going to struggle, shutting down Ta'amu, Matt Jones, and the entire running game. And I just see it being another tough week for the defenders. So I have that 25 St. Louis, defenders 12.
And I got DC 22, St. Louis 20, obviously covering the spread because DC is winning. What do you got? 4 field goals for DC, or do you got 2 touchdowns?
I'll give them 2 touchdowns. I'll say they can throw a few touchdowns in there. Cardell to Eli Rogers. I could use some Eli Rogers points this week.
No, not like. Can we
I
go to
got some. I got
Mark?
some catching up to do. Alrighty, then our last game, and you mentioned it before. This is going to be 9 p.m. on ESPN. Well, I'm interested to see what the viewership is for that game. We have Tampa Bay, that's at LA, and the over/under currently is at 40.5. And I think, and I agree with the spread here. I think this is going to be a really close game. And right now, LA is favored by 1 point.
Yeah, and we mentioned. Hang on 1 second. I just got to bring the rankings back up again. That Tampa has given up only 80 yards on the ground a game and 156.8 in the air a game. So it's hard to move the ball against these guys,
Yeah.
and that's why I think the spread is where it's at. Um, they're it's gonna be a close game. Our scores or your score is a little bit closer than mine. Our scores really don't really my score doesn't really reflect the spread there. I think Tampa Bay wins 27-19, but it's gonna be a fun game to watch. It's like you mentioned, it's gonna be interesting to see how they compete with what else is on TV at the time, being on ESPN. This is going to be the time slot that in a few weeks Sunday Night Baseball is going to be on, and the season's going to be over by then. But like that same kind of time slot there. Other Sunday night primetime shows are going to be on, so we'll see what the kind of viewership is there. But it's going to be, I think it's going to be a fun game, kind of back and forth action, and hopefully it ends week 5 on a high note.
Yeah, and I have Tampa winning by a score of 21-19. LA, I believe, has given up the most rush yards per game right now, a little over 130. That's obviously a strength of Tampa Bay. We already saw how Dev Smith and Jock Patrick last week both went over 100 yards. Tampa tends to struggle against the pass, even though their defense is solid. They struggle a little more against the pass, and Josh Johnson has proved to be very capable of putting up good numbers. So I think it's a really close matchup, and I think it's going to come down to Tampa Bay controlling the clock, really pounding the ball with Dev Smith and Jock Patrick, and that's why I think it's going to be close. But I think Tampa's going to hold on and be able to manage the clock.
And you got them covering the spread, but not the over under. Half
Yep.
a point off.
Yep. Okay. Any other notes on week 5 that you have this week?
No, I mean, I feel like we mentioned a couple of times that the league is trending in the right direction. They had a down week, what was it, week 2 for viewers and stuff like that, but it's been fun to watch. I mean, getting up and I say that because I work overnights on Friday nights, so getting up on Saturday, waking up and there's football on when I wake up, and it's just an awesome feeling. Um, unable to watch the other games, unfortunately, really because of my work schedule. But it's it's just fun to watch. And Houston plays at 2 o'clock on Saturday, so I'm really
Mm.
looking forward to watching that one. I thought DC was going to be my team because of all the former Bills there, but Houston kind of grabbed my heart with all the players that they got. Um, who do you root for? Who do you like?
Right now, I don't really have an allegiance. I'm just kind of playing the field. Maybe I'll see who wins the championship, and I'll play the bandwagon card a little bit. I think it'll be really tough to beat Houston this season. I see that my personal prediction for the season. I think Houston and St. Louis are going to play in the championship, and I actually think St. Louis is going to upset them in the end. I think they're going to really start just because of their defense. Their defense plays so well, and Houston had their number the first time, but I just see St. Louis playing better and really catching fire. But I think it's going to be kind of interesting. Where it's a shorter season, so a lot of teams we're already starting to talk about. I think they're going to get eliminated from playoff contention here. I know Tampa and LA are both 1-3. Whoever loses that game, going to 1-4, it's going to be very challenging to make the playoffs, especially when you have a couple teams that seem pretty locked in and ready to make a nice run. I think we're already at the point of the season here where some teams are going to have to really pick it up if they want to have a chance at the playoffs.
Yeah, it's unlike our league where I think 3 wins is going to make the playoffs in our
Yeah.
league. It's a lot different when they're actually out there 10 games. You're probably looking. You got to have at least like a 5-5. I'd say probably a 5-5 record to at least have a
Yeah.
shot at the playoffs. So going in 1-4, going into week 6 is going to be rough for one of those two teams.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is all that we have for you guys today. We appreciate you guys watching or listening, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, don't forget to check out Fantasy Holics on Facebook. We are working on a website currently. It's not up yet, but we'll hopefully have that for within the next couple podcasts. We'll hopefully have that up and be able to check that out. It's going to have a lot of articles on there. It's got a shop on there. Purchase some merchandise. Actually, got a shirt on right now. If you guys can see.
Repping the merch, I like it.
Yeah, too bad my camera doesn't pick it up. Um, but yeah, I mean, we didn't really talk too much about the actual what Fantasy Holics is. It is a lifestyle. We're a family, a community. But just to get a little bit more into it, we just a little background. We started off as a primarily like a fantasy football page. Um, Gained a big following just over the years, and kind of just transitioned into doing other sports. XFL obviously is football, so we were probably going to cover that anyways. But getting into basketball, baseball's coming up soon. Trying to grow the hockey market. We're giving out daily fantasy picks every day. So check out the page if you want to get some advice there. You can talk to us. You can ask for us personally by name, and we'll answer you in the chat if you want. And yeah, so it's Fantasy Holics, just spell how it is, fantasy and then Holics. We're on Facebook. Check us out. There's about 15 of us that just are waiting for people to just ask us questions so we can kind of just swing around and look like we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I'd be remiss. We're also on Twitter now, so Facebook and Twitter.
Facebook and Twitter, and I know they're talking about other social medias. We got a huge future ahead, so it's just up to you guys to help us keep it going.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it, and we're excited. So thanks for hopping on with me today, and I'm looking forward to the next one we do.